have a confession. I used to be a certified hater of ball gowns. I assumed that they were hard to make, uncomfortable to wear. I have since done a full 180 on these ones. Ball gowns are freaking great, and I have a hankering to make another one. Hello, I'm Miss Twisted. You can call me Charlotte. I do crafting, cosplay, and other weird and whimsical stuff, and I want to make a glittery, overly embellished, opulent, iridescent, a bunch of other adjectives, mermaid ball gown. Mostly just because I feel like it, but I'm also attending the Celestial Events Starfall Ball in October, and I am so excited for this one. And just to be clear, I am a paid guest of that ball, but this video is not sponsored by the Celestial Ball at all. I'm in fact under no obligation to make anything new for this one. But come on, it's a fantasy themed opulent ball. Of course I'm gonna make a new ball gown for it. As for the theme, well, I was kind of on the fence between a phoenix and a mermaid, kind of a fire-water situation, so I put it to my Patreon supporters to make the final choice for me. I want to mention the mermaid one only by a tiny bit, so I guess that means I have to make a phoenix one for next year. Oh no, what a shame, I get to make another ridiculous bird. Okay, so my original vision for this one was more of like a bioluminescent kind of vibe, but I realized that would involve a lot of like LEDs and like fiber optic cables, and I don't have the mental bandwidth to learn those new skills. So I'm sort of swapping out the bioluminescent for iridescent. So we're gonna have a lot going on at the head, don't know exactly what yet. Some big fancy shoulders like a mantle, a bodice or corset, and some kind of details coming off the hips. And I'm swapping out my usual love of hoop skirts for more of like a fishtail shape, you know? But take all of that and put it to the side for a second, because there's something I've been wanting to try for a while. Ever since I saw Kiralee Cosplay's version of Toph that has this giant like pull up set of floating rocks, I want to try that kind of peacock tail effect. I think the concept could lend itself really well to like a big fin or frill, so let's start there. Well, that lighting is terrible. Is this better? Alright folks, we are starting off strong on my kitchen floor because it's the easiest way to like lay out a big thing. And I've got like 9 of these fiberglass cable rods, which I'm hoping is going to be like a nice base for the peacock tail. So yeah, let's do this mock-up. These are in fact exactly the same cable rods as I use for all of my wings that you can see in previous videos. Okay, I actually think I'm going to try and do just the 6 rods and see if that works first, because if I can get away with less rods, great, less weight and less sewing, you know? I immediately changed my mind and went to 7 rods, and the funny thing is later on I changed my mind again to 8 rods, so you know what? That's the fun part about making something and figuring it out as you go. Anywho, once the base shape of the fin is cut out of this calico, I'm gonna sew a ribbon down each of those like long spiky sections where those rods are going to sit. It's a straight stitch down either side, essentially to create like some channels so I can slot the rods in. And I have to sew up one end of each of these as well to make sure those rods aren't going to fall out once I try this on, but I can't do the other end until I actually put the rods in. So first off, this room is a hot mess right now. Let's just collectively agree to ignore all of this. If you think this is bad, it is so much worse behind the camera. Anyway, it's the only room where I'm going to be able to open this up and like have it fit and not knock things over. Hopefully. I'm going to get rid of my very precious staff so I don't knock this over. I will cry. All right, on each of these strips, I've sewn up the top and bottom to like hold those big sticks in place. And that little ribbon along the bottom means I can tie this around my waist. All right, tied on just under my bust. That means that these long things are sitting kind of just like off the floor. So it's not going to drag on the floor, and that's my main concern. And then theoretically, I should be able to do 2 things. One of them is this, which is already pretty cool. But then theoretically, I can do this. Yes, okay, that is exactly the plan here. That is so extra. Oh my god, I can't believe that worked first try. I don't want to jinx it, but yeah. It does remind me that any kind of headpiece I make, I can't have anything that sits behind me, because otherwise it's gonna whack this when it's up. So yeah, I just gotta make sure that I keep that in mind. And yeah, should be pretty good. I will admit, it's giving Mega Vampire, but I think that once it's in the right colors, it's gonna look more like a giant fish fin, which is the aim. Now, in terms of fabrics and supplies for this project, I am leaning hard into glittery, gaudy, over the top, and I have the perfect fabric for this one. This absolutely like obnoxiously like bright and iridescent. I guess it's the crystal organza. I don't know the difference between organza and lame, but it's this stuff. I'm pairing this with a sort of liquidy satin that I have. Both of these are synthetic as heck. Usually I am a big advocate for natural fibers, but this time round there is not a natural fiber in sight, and that is kind of on purpose, and put a pin in that, we'll come back to it. So first off, we're doing it all again, except using this satin and adding an 8th point for some reason. I think I just wanted to expand like how far around it goes. Anywho, this top fabric is as slinky and slippery as it gets, so I am using some clear fabric glue very, very carefully because it will soak through this fabric, but I just want to like tack it down to this other piece because otherwise I know it's going to get all warped out of shape the second I try and sew these two pieces together. A full day later, just to make sure that glue is fully dry, I am sewing down along either side of the boning channel so that I can just see through this fabric. I'm mostly waiting that long because I do not want to risk any of that glue still being wet when I'm sewing it. I don't want to gunk up my machine even if I'm using those anti-glue needles. Especially because I just got myself a second-hand Bernina that is in such good condition, and it is so much nicer to sew with than all of the cheap budget singers that I've been using up until now. Anywho, as well as sewing down each of those boning channels, I'm also just doing like random lines of straight stitch in between. I don't know, just to create some texture. I'll be honest here, folks, I might have gone overboard with the texture. Finally, chucking in a ribbon at the top, threading in the rods, and then sealing up each end so those are not going to fall out. Okay, so firstly, height-wise, we're still doing okay. It's off the floor, and honestly, it just kind of looks like a cool bustle from the back, you know? From the front here, it looks pretty good just like this. Like, I love this fabric that I've picked out. It kind of looks like a very liquidy satin, if that makes sense. Especially with all those like lines running through it to create that sort of bubbly texture. And then moment of truth. Oh, I'm stuck on the wall. Oh my god! Are you kidding? Look at how extra that is! That is insane! You guys know that I like big and bombastic when it comes to cosplays. This is just like exactly my jam. This is amazing. God, I can't believe how good this looks, guys. I'm having so much fun with this already. You know, a lot of my costumes are very much trust the process and they don't look good at all until like the end. It's so nice to have something where so early on I can already see the final vision. I'm literally transfixed watching the light in the like tiny camera screen. This is insane. My only concern is this so bright and sparkly and shiny that it goes past fantasy into like rave, trippiness sort of thing going on? All right, I've got to put this down or I'm not going to get anything done. Okay, just so I can show some of the translucent edge at the top, I'm cutting away a little bit of the satin on one side. Okay, before we go on from here, there's something really important I need to talk to you guys about. One of the reasons I wanted to use synthetic fabrics for this one is partly just because you can get a lot of really shiny over-the-top fabrics, but also because you can like singe the edges and instead of like burning away the fabric, it melts the fabric and stops it from being able to fray. But synthetic fabrics are made of essentially plastic, which means you are burning plastic, which is incredibly toxic. Not to mention, a lot of synthetic fabrics are super flammable, so they could just straight up explode into flame. I would not be doing this without taking a lot of precautions, one of which is a respirator with fresh filters that can protect against things like solvents, not just particles. I would also only do this outside where there is no danger of anything around you catching alight, not to mention having other safety equipment near you, whether that is fire blankets, the correct type of fire extinguisher, and absolutely other people present to supervise. And I don't care if you think that is overkill, it is not worth lighting your house on fire or ruining your lungs for a cosplay ever. And for the record, the only reason I'm doing this inside is because I have purposefully set up this room to be like crazy ventilated with supervision and having absolutely nothing near me in this space. Long story short, take responsibility for your own safety. Don't do fire risks, protect your lungs, all that sort of thing. And while you guys have probably had enough of do as I say, not as I do want to mention that I did do a couple of test pieces that are just scraps over the sink, just so I knew how this fabric would react to the flame in the first place. So all of my edges being singed up definitely lent itself to some texture here, which is what I wanted because it was looking a little flat. Did I film this bit? No, I did not. I'm sorry. I was just a little bit lost in the sauce when it comes to like being in the creative zone, so I just went barreling on ahead with the next step, which was to add some gold detail because I just wanted more detail, more texture, and since I've got all of these like iridescent teals and blues, what better color to kind of complement that than a gold? And I'm gonna be honest, it's mostly just because I really freaking like gold. I end up using it in all of my projects. You might have noticed. I'm not even sorry, I've got my favorite colors. What can I say? Luckily, I still had tons of gold spray paint left over from my previous project, the Speaker of God, so I'm just gonna go nuts on the edges of this fin, just covering those areas. And in some of them, the gold and the blue kind of meld together into an iridescent green. Hey, I'm not mad about that, it's just more texture. All right, let's take this thing for a test drive. I can always add more detail later. In fact, I probably will. I just kind of want to make sure I'm on the right track, you know? Okay, here it is from the back. Hopefully that's looking nice. From the front, you get that beautiful sort of like blue satin, and you still get that translucent goldy stuff showing through, which I'm a big fan of. And moment of truth. Oh yeah, okay. Yeah, no, I'm so happy with that. That's fantastic. Off camera, I actually added like the tiniest little bit of a matte navy blue spray paint towards like the center area, like between each of these fin areas. And I think between that and the gold, it just adds a little bit more texture so it doesn't look quite so flat. I've got to say, usually at this point, there's at least a few things that have gone wrong. Everything has gone really smoothly for this project so far, so like, touch wood that it's still gonna be okay for the rest of it. I'm sure I'm gonna make some tweaks and changes later, but the big fin is functionally finished for now, which means I'm moving on to the headpiece, and the obvious choice for like a mermaid vibe is like fins and frills, but this costume is all about me doing whatever the heck I feel like, and I want to make horns, which might mean that it goes into a more sea dragon kind of look than mermaid. I'm not mad about that. It's a watery themed costume, therefore I'm going with the flow. Embracing my feral crafting methods, I'm just gonna sketch some horn shapes onto some 4mm thick EVA foam. There's a bunch of really cool patterns out there if you want to make your own foam horns, but I've done this enough times, I'm confident just kind of sketching the shapes and hoping they'll work. With my trusty cutting mat and scalpel, I'm cutting out 4 of each piece, blasting each one with a heat gun. That's going to help seal in the foam, and so I can curve it just a little bit, and I want half of these curved one way, half curved the other. That way they can kind of glue together as like 2 halves. Did forget to press record when gluing these together with contact adhesive. I'll put a link to one of Kamui Cosplay's videos down below to explain it better than I can. Also check this out, my camera keeps like unfocusing from the horn because it thinks this owl skull prop that I made is a face. Anywho, these glue seams are messy and only gonna get worse because I'm gonna use hot glue to glue multiple bits of these horns together into kind of antlers, I guess. We're going even further away from mermaid territory. Speaking of hot glue, there is no way that this hot glue is gonna hold these onto a metal headband, but I just need it to like hold it put long enough to get these felt pads underneath, and then I'm gonna like sew the horns onto the felt pad, and hopefully that's enough to hold it. Alright, there's 2 different ways I like to address like messy seams in foam. One of them is, of course, getting rid of the seams, smoothing the seams out, all that sort of thing. The other one is disguising the seams among more texture, and this time I'm doing both. My favorite method for filling seams in foam is using foam clay, which as the name suggests is basically a clay that is light and squishy, and when it dries it's not too different to EVA foam. Basically, I'm rolling them into these little thin sausages and like pressing them into those gaps. That's the neat part. Things get a little messy when you like wet your fingers and then rub over each of those areas to really smooth out those gaps so that like once this isn't like black and white, it should look pretty seamless. Okay, horns have dried overnight, so all that foam clay should be good. I'm about to do some toxic stuff. Thank you, past Charlotte, for the safety briefing. In case you're wondering, present Charlotte is in like a bazillion thermal layers and dressing gown because it's going to be freezing in this room, but I can't really do much about that because all the doors and windows are open. Okay, respirator on and the room fully ventilated because we are burning into foam this time. I'm using a wood burning tool to basically carve in a bunch of lines to go up these horns just to add that extra texture. Incidentally, if you don't want to use like an open flame, but you really do want to try singeing the edges of fabric, a wood burning tool's a slightly less risky version of that than an open flame. Alright, these are looking pretty textured. It is time for some primer, and for that, I'm using Plastidip, mostly just because it's the lazier, quicker option than hand painting on Flexbond. So after the second round of Plastidip, I was staring at these horns and just had a moment of, what am I doing? This is nowhere near extra enough. I need more. So you can get these long EVA foam dowels from Lumen's workshop. I get all of my EVA foam, foam clay, and contact adhesive from these guys. What can I say? I stan our small businesses. Anywho, I've cut these into shorter chunks and I'm shaving them down with scissors into like a spiny, very thin horn. And we're going to do the same with even thinner strips of this dowel. I made 8 of these little spines, 4 for each side, and I'm just going to use them to add some extra details to this headpiece. With the ones on the side of the head, I'm even thinking of coming back to the idea of fins. Anywho, some fresh Plastidip over the whole thing, and the next layer is going to be this chrome paint. Only because I've got a metallic green spray paint that has to go over a chrome base. And this one really needs to be built up a little bit. It took like quite a few layers to really get the kind of color I was after. Okay, with those dry, this part is really cool. I have this mica powder that is literally iridescent, and I found that if I like apply hairspray, I can literally just brush it on over the top, and look at this finish. Look at that iridescent color. God damn, this is so pretty. For the tips of the horns, I've got this stuff here, which is a MAC loose powder eyeshadow that is like a sort of metallic-y gold. Now don't at me for keeping a makeup powder for like 10 years. I know that makeup does expire and you're supposed to throw it out after a certain amount of time. I cannot afford to be throwing away good pigments like every time they expire. I would just never buy makeup. I don't have that kind of money. I still, of course, advocate for being hygienic with your makeup and like honoring the expiry dates on things. But I'm still going to keep things like this if it's like a powder pigment because I can use it in, for example, craft projects. Side note, I do realize that hairspray and brushing on a powder is probably not going to hold super well, so I will have to apply a top coat after all this to properly seal this in and make sure this doesn't just come off on everything. But that is future Charlotte's problem. My magpie brain is just absolutely reveling in all of these beautiful metallic shiny colors going on. So the fact that gold has been a feature of so many of my previous projects has a massive advantage in that I have so much leftover gold accessories and bits and pieces. So I've got like a bunch of chains from op shops. I guarantee you this is not real gold. I paid $3 for it. So with all these random little bits of gold metal, we're going to decorate these horns. To start with, I have exactly 2 of these left, so they're going to go on one of these horns at least. I'm really into these chains here that have the gold discs, so they're definitely going on here somewhere. I'm breaking out the jewelry pliers and the O-rings that I haven't used in years, but luckily I still remember how to do this. It's basically just a lot of squishing metal together to get the O-ring on one end of the chain and then this big O-ring on the other to fit on that big thick horn. Alright, round 1, pretty solid start. I have a handful of these little gold cuffs, which I assume are aluminium. They're just like super bendable, so I'm sticking a bunch of those on these spiny bits. For the parts where the chain needs to literally go into the horn, I've got these head pins. I'm going to cut in half and then just kind of bend into, I think these are just called U-pins at this point, like staples. That way the chain can go on one end of this U-pin, and before I put the chain in place, I'm just gonna like puncture holes where I want this to go first and then put the chain on. And this still was really hard to get into exactly the right spot. They're just really tiny little pieces. And maybe I'm just a bit clumsy too. It took a lot of finagling, but in the end this whole headpiece got completely covered in these chains, and I am so happy with that. As one final touch, I decided to add in a little fin to this little spine section. So with a little bit of a paper mock-up, I cut this out of that same organza, singed the edges again, and easy as pie, I am just gluing this straight to the back of the spines. Because my fabric glue here is like crystal clear and doesn't seem to be soaking through as long as I'm very lenient with it, I don't really need to do anything else. The colors on these just look fantastic. I'm so happy with that. Not gonna lie, they even look kind of cool just with the glasses chains. My only critique is it's a little top heavy. I kind of wish I'd done these little fin parts a little lower. Then again, I'm going to have a lot going on at the shoulders, so maybe it's not a bad thing that everything kind of stays up here. Speaking of shoulders, with my giant fin and horns done, guess what time it is? Okay, we have a mannequin covered in cling wrap, which can mean only one thing. It is duct tape pattern time. Except on this channel, we use fragile tape instead of duct tape. Why? Look, it's a long story, and this time around, I don't feel like explaining. My regulars can explain in the comments why I do this. But wrong answers only, yeah? Okay, going in with like a very vague plan here, but essentially it's like a little bolero mini jacket vest thing that only goes down under the arm and then only just enough to cover the shoulders and pretty much nothing else. And to make this even easier, I'm just cutting this out of a stretchy nylon, so even if I've got my dimensions slightly wrong, the nylon's just gonna kind of stretch into place. This thing is gonna be so decorated that you're not really gonna see any of this base fabric anyway. The other thing that's great about this stretchy fabric, you don't have to hem any of the edges. You could just leave them raw because they are not gonna fray. The only bit here I have to sew is on the top of the shoulders here. And I'm just using a regular straight stitch because this part doesn't really need to stretch, it's just the rest of it that does. Now we'll come back to the shoulders. First off, I have this giant pile which is all just scraps of silk. There's lots of it, but they're all these individual smaller pieces. And not quite the color palette I want for this project, so it is all going in a pot of indigo dye. Side note, this is my designated dye pot and spoon, not for cooking with. Alright, it's past my bedtime and I'm just still filming because I'm kind of on a roll right now, I don't know. Anyway, shoulders, right? I really want to have pauldrons or shoulder armor of some sort. I don't know why, I just think the idea of a really pretty dress with some fancy shoulder armor just reads as like, I am the belle of the ball, but I could also kick your butt. I don't know, I think we can probably blame Game of Thrones for that one. So this little sketch is kind of the closest thing I have to a plan of some sort. I'm just going to cut out 4 of like what I think I need for the shape to get to that point. And much like with the horns, we are blasting this with a heat gun just to seal in that foam and give it the tiniest bit of curve before we glue it together. I'm going to leave the foam gluing till tomorrow, but the general gist I want for this like mantle shoulder piece is like the most shiny and over the top part of this besides the horns, because like this, the portrait is the focal point, you know? So I'm thinking a bunch of like fabric layers hanging off the sides like a little mini capelet on the sleeves. Any gold chain that I've got left from the horns is gonna like hang down as a necklace between them. And to embellish every single part of this to make it as gaudy as possible, one of the things I have is a bunch of these little iridescent rhinestone things. And so damn many of these beetle wings. These have been sitting in my craft stash for like at least a decade, probably close to 15 years. I don't remember when or where I got them, and I just haven't really used them properly for anything. And I think today might be the day. Well, not today because I'm about to go to sleep. Tomorrow will be the day. Potentially the next day, because I'm going to be doing the foam shoulders. Look, it's going to be soon. Anyway, my point is there is going to be no subtlety with this project. Let's be honest, there never is with my projects. I don't do subtle. All right, I'm starting to ramble. I'm going to finish my hot chocolate and go to bed. Good night, guys. Okay, up bright and early the next morning to apply the contact adhesive to my shoulder pieces and actually remember to film myself putting them together this time. And I'm just going to leave these outside for the fumes to dissipate while I check on my fabric, which now should all be dry after dyeing. They've taken almost too well to that dye pot. Like they're almost all the same color now. And I know I put them all in the same pot of the same color dye, but the base colors were so different that I kind of expected them to have slightly different results between them. So I've lost a little bit of color variety there, but I think I've got enough going on that it'll still look amazing. Now, I know these pauldrons are going to end up covered in a lot of beads or beetle wings or something, but I want to get like a bit of a base layer going. So I'm using some of my silk scraps to just cover all of these up just to make sure the color is kind of uniform if it does poke out between some of those details. And for this part, it is just straight up fabric glue, like stuck to the outside and then like wrap the excess around the bottom here. There's a couple of spots where the glue has shown through the fabric on this side, but I'm not too worried about that. Again, it's just kind of a base layer. And that's also why I'm not too worried about this seam layer right along the top of each of these pieces. Like, it's just gonna get all covered up later on. As I was looking at the fabric scraps I had, I noticed a lot of them were very long, thin strips. So I decided to cut them into even thinner strips and just start braiding a bunch of them together. I've actually used this idea a couple of times before. It's a really fun way to use up your fabric scraps. And it kind of creates like a really interesting, unique, I don't know, trim or embellishment. Obviously not going to work for every project, but if you're aiming for like opulent or detail, but not necessarily neat, I don't know, I think it's kind of fun. And I know I overused the word texture in this project, but yeah, it gives some really cool texture. And I was already debating putting something on the border of this bolero mantle thing, so it ended up being one of these braids. And honestly, no regrets. I think this was exactly the right choice for the kind of vibe I'm going for. Okay, I've just noticed as well with all of these pieces here, which are my largest silk scraps, they all have the selvage edge still on them, which is like the edge that they are manufactured with that stops them fraying here. So I don't even have to hem this when I sew this onto the actual mantle. I can just use this line and it's free. It's a free hem, basically. Seriously guys, I paid like $5 for a giant box of like silk offcuts. I got so lucky with this stuff. Okay, the sleeves are going to be so simple. I have two of the largest of my silk scraps, which are just two big semicircles of fabric. And I am literally just going to sew over the top of the shoulder here like a sleeve, except just not all the way around. With that layer sewn on, layer 2 is going to be a combination of these two fabrics, one of which is that same crystal organza I used earlier for the big fin. The other one is just like a different crystal organza. It's more of this very deep blue, and something about the combinations of these two just work really well together. The word that comes to mind is opalescent, I guess. And with that layer sewn on, I hope you're starting to see the vision here. Obviously everything will be properly attached once it's all finished. One last little sleeve layer of this sort of greeny satin organza, and then we are sticking on the armor pieces. I'm not just going to glue these because I don't trust the fabric glue alone to hold these, so we are going to hand stitch these down a little bit as well. So far so good. The last thing I'm going to do for this day is a bunch of embellishments right in the front here. I don't know why, I just kind of felt like starting this, so I'm using a bunch of these iridescent beads, which can be glued and sewn into place, which I really appreciate. I also realized I hadn't thought about how to clasp them together at the front, so we're just going with a hook and eye sewn on. Okay, happy with how everything's looking so far. Loving the little cape sleeves. I think they're really cool. I'm feeling indecisive about where to go from here. Like, I do want to decorate this part here and the actual pauldrons, but I'm not 100% set on how to do that. On this side here, I've been mucking around with these beetle wings, and I do think I want to use these in this way on here. I'm just kind of deciding, like, do I just go crazy and like unordered and just keep sewing them on? Or do I like try and make them all like different layers of them, like actual scales? I don't know. And I really like the look of the braids, so all of these braids I made, I kind of want to incorporate here, and I'm wondering if I can do this and the beetle wings, or whether that's going to be too much. I don't know, I think I'm overthinking it. Like, all of the accessories that I've put together are all within theme, within the right texture and colors, so I don't think it really matters exactly how I place them at this point. Like, they're all going to work together. Okay, I had this idea pop into my head that I wanted to try. So I took a rough like shape of the space under the pauldron, and I'm just going to trace that on some scrap silk to start with. I'm going to glue down strips of wool yarn I had left over from a previous project. And I'm going to use that as a guide when I glue another piece of fabric over the top and kind of sew between the lines of the yarn. I don't know if this is like piping, couching, quilting. I can't quite work out what it would be called, but I know I've seen this before. Sewers, sound off in my comments. Tell me what the heck I'm doing here. Anywho, the aim here was just texture and dimension. Within that shape, it kind of looks like a flowing river, I guess. I'm folding it into this space with fabric glue and a couple of tacking stitches, but ideally you would put this on before you put the pauldron on so that you could like machine stitch this down to that jacket. But that is one of the downsides of making it up as you go along. Like, you don't know what you're going to need until it's too late. In any case, this gets the job done. One more braid just to fill out that space, and I'm moving on to the pauldrons. Some of the beetle wings I can pierce at the top and bottom with a sewing needle so that I can sew them down along the border where they're more likely to catch, just for reinforcement. Luckily, the rest of them can stick on pretty well with hot glue. My gut instinct just said to layer them up like scales, and I think this worked perfectly. Just to add some final sparkles, I chucked a bunch of rhinestones all over the collar. And there's probably a better way to do this, but I'm just dabbing dots of glue with a clay tool and then just like smushing each rhinestone on individually. Also, I've been like very carefully trimming some of these beetle wings for smaller pieces, which gave me the idea to like use some of my leftover little chips and create like little tiny mosaic pieces just to kind of, I don't know, add some more. We are going extra for this project. I've got to say, I am really chuffed with that. That just looks so cool. And honestly, I've been resisting the urge to like tone down some of the shiny glitteriness of this project. I think because I'm using so many shiny fabrics and rhinestones and stuff, it can read as a bit more like modern. And I'm very much like a classic fantasy girly a lot of the time, but I'm glad that I didn't, because I think in this case, it really does add to the whole thing feeling like a sparkling, watery goddess, you know? And as you might have noticed from the runtime of this video, I'm not going to do the entirety of the ball gown this time round. I'm trying to kick the habit of doing gigantic multi-step projects squeezed into one video and like rushing through everything. So just a couple of things left before we put together everything we've got so far and do a reveal. For a basic top, I cut up a teal t-shirt and sewed some extra braids on, and that'll do for now. And I've been waiting for an excuse to use these mermaid ears from Felifay. They might be called siren ears, actually. Let me double check. Whatever it is, I'll put the link in the description. So a few videos ago for my Fern cosplay, I got a wig from Wig is Fashion, and I had like no affiliation with them. I had paid normal price for that wig and everything, but I liked the quality so much, I reached out to these guys and said, hey guys, I really like your wigs, can I have another please? So this time it is as affiliated with Wig is Fashion. I have gotten this one as a gift. We've gone with this deep purple to contrast really nicely against all of those blues and greens without like breaking up the jewel tone kind of vibe, you know? The main two things that stood out to me about these ones is they are very full wigs and they are large enough that they don't give me a wig headache like most wigs. And I do think this color was exactly the right choice. I wasn't planning on having quite so much cleavage, but you know what? It looks good. Gonna take a second to shout out Lyris Design, who is a friend of mine who made this corset, I think like 6 years ago. Anyway, they do absolutely incredible work. Please go and check them out. They do custom orders, bridal stuff, ball gowns, cosplay, you name it. I'm sorry, not sorry for name dropping like a gazillion different small businesses in this video. Look, I like to support my friends and share my resources. The corset also means I can tuck in the ugly ties for the fin. Maybe at some point I'll replace these with like a nice sash or something, but for now it just kind of hides it. Of course, this project really needed to be outside to make the most of the space and the light. Seeing this come together, I am so proud of myself. There's a lot of things I want to change, like adding in some more green, but like everything is moving beautifully, everything is sparkly and glowy. It's exactly the vibe I was going for. It started to pour down rain, so I'm gonna get my camera inside before I ruin it. Okay, you guys, I am so happy to be back inside in the warmth and the dry, but I am so happy with how everything is looking. The colors are fantastic. There's definitely some tweaks and changes I'm going to need to make before this is finished. One of the big ones is securing those chains better. A bunch of them have fallen off already, so I think I need to like glue them into place rather than just having them on the O-rings. That kind of thing is Future Charlotte's problem. I've got a couple of other projects I have to work on first, but I hope you like how it's looking so far. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will put a link to the Starfall Ball and all the other resources I've mentioned down in the description below. Quick announcement as well, guys. I am coming back to Europe. This time I am a guest of Unicon happening at the end of October near Vienna. I have never been to Austria before, so I am so excited. If you are there, please come and say hello. A huge thank you to my ultimate supporters on Patreon. Artemis, Michael, Mix Randv, Mohican Creates, Morigo, Robert Mischief, Residual Images, Toby, Vera Lynn, and Yuri. And thank you also to these other amazing Patreon supporters who are on screen now. Hey, you should come and join us over on Patreon. I post previews, work in progress, and sometimes exclusive mini projects that you cannot find anywhere else. Plus, joining my Patreon is the best way to support me so I can keep making ridiculous and overambitious and shiny projects like this one. But if Patreon's not your jam, just by being here, watching my videos, liking, commenting, subscribing, sharing, all that good stuff that keep the YouTube robots happy, you are supporting me. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!